This really is big because Finland is a very significant country in a military sense. It's got a small army, but when it mobilizes, it has an army of over 200,000. And that's 3 times bigger than the British army. So they've got big land forces and they train and they're well equipped and they mean it. Finland's been independent since 1945. And this switch in Finland's posture is a very big deal for NATO. The Russians invaded Finland, and the Winter War, so-called Winter War of 1939-40, was a war that the Finns lost, but they fought the Russians very, very hard indeed. And the Russians found they couldn't conquer Finland, and they took a section of it. And as a result of that, Finland got itself involved in German, working with the Nazis a little bit in the Second World War. And then at the end of the war, became determinedly neutral. So Finland's been neutral since 1945. Sweden has been neutral since 1812. And both of them now want to become members of NATO. And since 1945, the Finns have been very careful in the way they react to Russia. They've played Russia very carefully by not pushing the diplomacy too far, trying to make sure that the Russians were happy with everything they did. That was the case all through the Cold War. And now, since 1991, Finland's been much more independent. And now they're so independent, they think that they can join NATO.
How do you think the man we're looking at now, Vladimir Putin, is going to take this news?
Well, he pretends not to care, but he cares very much, because this has actually added another 830 odd miles, 1,300 kilometers of NATO territory or NATO border with Russia. So it means that any Russian leader's defense requirements are now a bit different. It gives him something to bother about and a bigger frontier to worry about if he worries about these things. But he pretends that it doesn't really matter. They'll take whatever measures they need to take to counter it. But actually, there's nothing the Russians can do. And they don't have enough troops to be able to really pack this frontier because they're sending all of their available troops to Ukraine. So this is the biggest development in European security since the remilitarization of Germany in 1955, when Germany came into NATO as a remilitarized state after the Second World War. You know, this is the biggest NATO enlargement, the most important NATO enlargement since then. And President Putin can say what he likes about it. The fact is, this is a big diplomatic defeat for him, which has produced exactly what he said this war was designed to prevent, which was NATO enlargement.
Well, isn't one of the reasons that he gave for the invasion of Ukraine the fact that NATO was on the Russian doorstep, which it wasn't? Ukraine was not a member of NATO, and they kept saying it never will be, even though it wants to be. It will take a long time. And now you've got the Finns joining up and Sweden sure to follow.
Yeah, exactly. So it's made Russia's security situation much worse than it was originally, and that's not going to change in the short term. And the fact is that Putin had several motives for this Ukrainian war, but one of the motives he started to float as the war got closer was that this was all about pushing NATO back and telling NATO that it can't keep taking on new members. And remember that the new members of NATO this was all demand-driven. NATO didn't want to enlarge itself. It just was responding to requests, very strong requests by other states in Europe that wanted to join NATO. And Putin sort of assumed that NATO was behind all of this, but it wasn't really. It was just responding to demands from other countries. And so here we are now with a situation where NATO is bigger than it's ever been before, stronger than it's been in many, many years, militarily and politically. And Russia's in a situation where it can't do very much about that.